Welcome to my pre-built function video. Let's begin. Now, let's start with what pre-built functions slash classes are. Now, what they are functions slash classes in Python that have already been coded by another programmer, are then built into Python and can be used if you import them or you call the name in your program if they're already part of Python. Like a few of them are, like print, for example. But the most of the ones I'm going to be talking about aren't. So let's continue. Now there are a lot of them, like a lot. Even in my code, it take a really long time to describe them all. So I'm just going to list a few that I use and also where they are in my code and how I use them. Now let's begin. Now I'm just going to make a little point here about Pygame, which is a huge amount of different other pre-built functions and classes combined into one big pre-built function and class, and a lot of the ones below here are just part of it. So if I say not to import them, it means that you have to just import Pygame and you already have them. So yeah. Now to use pre-built functions, you either A, as I just said, have to import them, or if they're already part of Pygame, you just have to import Pygame. Or some you don't have to do either because, like as I said, print, they're already part of Python. Like they're just straight up built in. Now in my game, I use a lot of pre-built functions and classes. I'm going to list 5 of them now. Now the first pre-built function slash class I'm going to talk about is the pygame.time.clock, which is a class. Now I use this clock function only once in my code, but it's a pretty important purpose because what it does, it limits the frame rate of my game so that it remains very smooth. And I do this by typing clock.tick bracket 60 and then another bracket. And what this command does is limit the frame rate in the loop that I put in, which is in this case my game loop, to a number in the brackets, which is 60. Now to make this work, you first must import Pygame because this is part of the Pygames library, and then you must make a variable name equal pygame.time.clock, and then you want to limit the frames, and then when you want to limit the frames, type the variable name. Like I made mine clock, I made it clock equals pygame.time.clock, and then so you do clock for, in this example, dot tick, then the bracket, then the number of your desired frame rate, and then another bracket. And the main use, there's only one real use for this class, which is just limiting the frame rates of your games in Pygame. And yeah, just keep in mind that you got to put it in the loop, and it'll limit the frame rate of that loop rate. Now next on to sys, which isn't a pre-built function slash class. It's more of a pre-built module, but I'm gonna still talk about it, and I'll explain why later. And what this does is it's a module that can be used to get rid of a bunch of ugly text whenever you close your game. Now to use sys, you must import it, first of all, because it's not part of Pygame's library. And the way you use it is whenever you type pygame.exit to close your game, you must type sys.exit and then 2 brackets. And when you do this, it'll get rid of a bunch of ugly error code whenever you close your game. Now, this definitely is not required, but I personally feel like it's very useful and just makes your game look a lot better. And I use it just as its main goal is just get rid of that ugly code. Now, even though this isn't a function slash class, it's still pre-built, and I just think it's very useful, and so I wanted to mention it. Now on to the randint function, which I use this function to randomly generate a number that will be the pipe height, so that the pipes keep randomly changing their heights in the game, so it's a little harder. Now the way randint works is it will generate a random number between 2 values that you type. And the way you use it is that you first got to import random, since this function is not part of the Pygame library. Then you must type a variable name, then equal, then random.randint, then a bracket, then the minimum value that you want the random value to be. So like the smallest value you want that random number to be, then a comma or that, then the max number that you want your random number to be, and then another bracket. And then once you do this, all you have to do, for example, is use something to display that variable. For example, the print function. And then every time you run your code, it will give a random number between that min and then that max value. And yeah, you can use this for a lot of different purposes. I use it for the randomized heights in my game, but very useful function. Okay, then onto a pre-built class which I use, which is the rect class. Now what rect does is that it essentially allows you to create rectangular shapes or areas. And I use rect in my code to create the floor, which is at the bottom of my game, which is a long thin rectangle. I also use it to create collision boundaries for each of the upper and lower pipes, so that if you hit them, you get a game over. And I also make it that I also rect a bird collision box around the little bird image, so that every time you hit it, it gives you a game over. Now, the way you use rect is that you first must make a variable name, like most of these, then an equal sign, then you type pygame.rect, and then a bracket, then the x coordinate for where you want that rectangle to be, then the y coordinate, and then the width, and then the height. And after this, you can use the object you have rected. Oh yeah, and the bracket too, another bracket. And then once you do this, you can use this object you have rected by calling the name you tied it to through multiple different ways, but the main way being blitting it, which will just display that rectangular object that you have made. Now, the next one, which I just mentioned, is the blit function. And what blit does is it allows you to draw a one surface onto another, basically allowing you to just draw objects onto your screen. Now, I use blit a lot in my code. I first of all use it to blit on my background onto the screen, and also the player score. I also use it to blit both the upper and bottom pipes on the screen. I also blit the bird onto the screen. I also use it to blit my start screen messages whenever that happens, and same with the game over screen too. Now on to how to use blit. To use blit, you must first type the destination that you want the surface to be drawn upon. Now usually just make it your screen. And then what you want to do is a dot, a little, sorry, not a dot, a period. Then you want to type blit, and then a bracket, then the name, usually like, for example, if you made a variable rect, you'd want to type that. And then a comma, then a little comma, then another bracket, and then the x and the y coordinates of like the location on your screen of where you want it to be blitted, then 2 more brackets. And after you do this, the object you want to be blitted should appear on your screen and where the location you want it to be. But keep in mind that its size will not scale automatically, so your image might be way too small or way too big if you haven't manually scaled it using the scale pre-built function, so make sure to use that. And onto the last pre-built class / function I'm going to talk about, which is the pygame.image.load function. And what this function does is allow you to load actual images into your code, because usually you can just use like blank shapes. So here you can use real images from Google, for example, into your code, so it's very useful. And I use it a lot, mainly to load in the image of the Flappy Bird itself and the pipes, and also the background image, because I could not make any of those. I'd have to take them off Google. And to use this function, what you have to first do is make sure you have Pygame imported, because this is part of its library. You also want to make sure the image you are loading is in the same file as your code, otherwise this won't work. This won't work. And I think it also has to be in PNG, so make sure that all of those are make sure those are all correct, especially it being in the same file, because that can be a little tricky to do. And if any of those like isn't met, any of those criteria I just listed is not met, then it won't work. And then what you want to do is make a variable name, then type equal, then type pygame period image period load, then a bracket. Then this is a little weird, but you want to type a quotation mark, and then the name of the images file that you've put into your code file. So this isn't the like name that you got off Google, it's the name that you've named the file itself when you've put it into your computer. And then you want to do another quotation mark. Make sure you have the quotation marks, otherwise it won't work. And then a bracket. And then after this, when you use blit and blit the variable on, you should put the image on the screen if you use, for example, blit when you typed in that variable name that you typed in earlier. And yeah, thank you very much.